I'm going to do something a bit different for this series. We're going to do a deep dive into the 4 Against Darkness role-playing game. You're probably asking, what in the world is 4 Against Darkness? Well, that's the purpose of this video. I'm going to give you the rundown on the game itself and the basics of gameplay. In subsequent videos, I'll go over some of the more advanced rules, along with in-depth looks at all of the expansions to the base game. So first off, what exactly is 4 Against Darkness? Well, if you're even vaguely familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, you'll have the general idea on what 4AD is. You create a group of 4 adventurers of varying classes, and brave dungeons in pursuit of fame and fortune. In your way, you'll run into various traps and creatures that are aiming to harm you and prevent you from leaving. If you succeed and survive the dungeon, you'll probably make it out with some extra gold, maybe some better equipment, and so on. You know, standard RPG stuff. What makes 4 Against Darkness a bit more unique is that it's designed to be run solo. If you're someone like me that has no friends, then this is perfect! But let's take everything step by step. First off, what do you need for 4AD? Well, the book for one. It's 90 pages of useful information, and you'll be referencing it every few minutes, unless you somehow memorize every single room layout or treasure table. Secondly, you need at least one standard 6-sided die. If you have more than one, it will make some rolls a bit easier, but that's completely optional. Next up is a piece of paper and a pencil. Grid paper is preferred, but for a long time, I used the standard legal pad and it worked fine for me. You'll understand why grid paper is preferred once we get to dungeons and room layouts, but we'll get there in time. And that's it. Granted, if you really get sucked into the 4AD world, you'll eventually need more dice, such as 8 and 12-sided dice, and an extra notebook will be handy, but this stuff isn't required for the base game, and that's all we're focusing on here. Time to pick our team. Here's where I'm going to tell you a little tip. Although it's not required, having index cards on hand for your party is very helpful. You'll be updating health and inventories frequently, so in my experience, having a separate index card for every party member made things a bit more organized, instead of using the playsheet that comes with the book. Also, by having one index card per adventurer, you can mix up your team a bit easier, rather than creating new playsheets. Anyway, regardless on how you are going to keep track of your party, know that there are 8 starting classes: Warrior, Cleric, Rogue, Wizard, Barbarian, Elf, Dwarf, and Halfling. From these, you'll create 4 level 1 adventurers to brave your first dungeon. Of course, each class has different stats, skills, and perks. Let me touch on each one briefly, as having a basic knowledge on how each class works may increase your chances of surviving in the first dungeon. The Warrior is a great all-around attacker, as he adds his level to all of his attack rolls in combat. Sure, this may not make a lot of sense now, but it will when we get to how combat works. He can equip pretty much anything, whether it be a 1 or 2-handed weapon, light armor, or heavy armor. By default, he starts with light armor, a shield, a 1-handed weapon, but you can also swap that for a 2-handed weapon and heavy armor if you'd like. He starts with 2d6, or 2 standard dice rolls, of gold, so just roll 1 die twice and add the 2 numbers together. He also starts with 7 life, or 6 plus his level. Overall, if it's your first time playing, a Warrior is probably one of the better picks in my opinion. Next up is the Cleric, another great choice. He may not be a heavy hitter, but he is able to add half of his level, rounded down, to his attacks. However, if he's fighting undead creatures, such as zombies, skeletons, and the sort, that half level gets changed to a full level instead. A Cleric is allowed to wear both light and heavy armor, along with the ability to carry a shield. As far as weapons, he is permitted to carry either a 1-handed weapon or a 2-handed weapon, as well as a sling. The Cleric starts with a d6 roll for gold, and his life points amount to his level plus 4, or 5 for level 1. The biggest benefit to having a Cleric tag along is their ability to cast a blessing spell and a healing spell 3 times each per adventure. We'll get more into spells a bit later, but blessing cures most status ailments, which is huge in dungeons where you run into Medusas, my personal most hated creature, next to the invisible gremlins. Healing allows the Cleric to heal up an adventurer's wounds, so its usefulness is pretty self-explanatory. The third class that's available is the Rogue, one of my personal favorites. The Rogue is excellent at evading attacks, adding his level to his defensive rolls. In addition, if your party is outnumbering the threat that you are fighting in combat, the rogue will add his level to his attack rolls as well. The rogue also adds his level to any rolls for disarming traps. Seriously, you cannot go wrong with a rogue in your party. However, there is a catch to all of this awesomeness. He can only equip light armor and light hand weapons, with a sling being his only ranged option. And yes, there's the difference between light hand weapons and standard one-handed weapons, which you might imagine we'll get to in a bit. The rogue starts with 3d6 gold pieces along with rope, lockpicks, light armor, and a light hand weapon. I should clarify that when I say they start with light armor and weapon, you can choose what you want that weapon to be. It's part of the fun of the 4AD experience to determine exactly what kind of weaponry each of your adventurers are choosing to run with. Anyway, the rogue also starts with 4 life, or level plus 3, so he is a bit squishy, but that defensive buff to his rolls helps alleviate this. The 4th class is the Almighty Wizard, Master of the Arcane. Combat-wise, the Wizard is a bit dangerous to use early in his career, as he only ever adds his level to spellcasting rolls. He doesn't wear armor either. He only gets a light hand weapon and sling, so he's a serious liability in early game runs, but if you can manage to keep one alive, they can become a devastating party member in their own right. A wizard starts his journey with a light hand weapon, a spellbook, and according to the 4AD book, writing instruments. You don't need to worry about that. The wizard could be one of the richest characters in the game at the start, carrying 4d6 gold pieces at creation, but he's only got 3 life, or level plus 2. Ouch. The wizard, on the other hand, does wield 2 spells plus 1 per level per adventure, so on your first run with a wizard, he'll have 3 spells at his disposal. This might mean 1 casting of 3 different spells, or 2 of one and 1 of the other, completely up to you on how you want the wizard to organize his spells. Next up, the Barbarian. He's kind of a warrior with an extra attack buff, but I still prefer the warrior overall due to the fact that the Barbarian cannot use magical items, including the healing potions that you can find or purchase, although he will for some reason allow clerics to heal him due to it being more of what the book calls a divine favor versus standard arcane magic. Anywho, the Barbarian, like the warrior, adds his level to attack rolls and can equip pretty much anything that the warrior can, provided that it's non-magical in nature. He starts with 1d6 gold and has 7 plus level health, or 8 points at the start. What gives the Barbarian that slight edge in combat is the rage ability. If you choose to use this once per game ability, you roll an attack die 3 times instead of the normal 1, and choose the best result. That's it. Whether you think that this gives the Barbarian a true edge over the warrior is up to you, but this guy? Don't think so. The next adventurer is the Almighty Elf. I know, Elf is more of a race than a class, but it's listed as a class in the 4AD book, so that's what we get. Anywho, the Elf adds their level to attack rolls unless they're using a 2-handed weapon, as well as a +1 when fighting any orcish creature. They also add their level to spellcasting rolls like a wizard. Elves can wear any armor, as well as carry a shield. They can also use any weapon they want. They start out with light armor, a 1-handed weapon, and a bow. Gold-wise, roll 2 dice, and that's what they begin the game with. Elves also have 5 HP to start, or 4 plus their level. Elves can also cast 1 spell per level per adventure, but only if they aren't using a shield and are wearing light armor. Personally, whenever using elves, I kept the blessing spell at the ready. You never know when you'll need it. Next up is the Dwarf, another race instead of a class. If you are going for utter riches, the Dwarf is your character to use. Add level to attack rolls, except when using ranged weapons. They also have a +1 to their defense against trolls, ogres, and giants, a nice defensive benefit to using them. Oh, and they also have +1 to attack rolls against goblins. So yeah, a hefty combat character. They can equip any armor and weapon, as well as use a shield. They start the game with the same stuff a warrior does, as well as 3d6 gold. They also begin the journey with 5 plus their level health, so 6 at level 1. The extra perk the dwarf has is that whenever you sell a gem or jewelry after the dungeon run, you get a bonus 20% in gold. Very nifty. Last but not least is the halfling. Okay, maybe the halfling is the least, as like the wizard, I don't have a lot of experience using them. They only ever add their level to their defense rolls against giants, trolls, and ogres, as I guess they try to duck under their legs and such. They wear light armor only, and only carry light hand weapons and a sling. They also only start with this light hand weapon and sling, so you'll need to buy armor if you want him to be a bit more protected. Halflings start with 2d6 gold and 4 HP, or 3 plus their level. Their class specific perk is having luck points. In each run, they have 1 plus their level luck points. Luck points are used to run away from combat easily, or to reroll a die at almost any time, although you can't reroll a reroll. Although this is a nice benefit to have, they really don't have anything else on the menu that entices me to bring a halfling along. And that's the 8 characters. Pick 4 that appeal to you, make some rolls, and write down their stats on whatever medium you're using, whether it be paper, index card, dry erase board, or hell, Sharpie on the wall if you are so inclined. When you got all of that ready, it's time to go shopping before you set your first foot into that initial dungeon. Right after the classes in the book are the descriptions of the various pieces of equipment and items, as well as what you can buy from the shop. If there is one thing you must have, it's a lantern, so make sure that's the first thing you buy, bar none. Without the lantern, things get exponentially difficult in the dungeons, to the point that it's almost impossible to get anywhere. Just remember that the lantern bearer has one of his hands tied up 24/7, so they cannot wield a two-handed weapon or a shield. Well, I guess they can carry a shield and the lantern, but then they don't have an attack rule. It's not described in the 4AD book, but if there's one thing you're going to learn from this excellent game, is that you're allowed to make up, change, or ignore rules, as long as you have fun playing it. You probably won't have enough money to buy healing potions, so I'd also recommend purchasing bandages. Bandages heal 1 life point, and technically cannot be used more than once per adventure. But I personally think that rule is dumb, so I use bandages as often as I'd like. Other than that, take a look, see if you want to purchase any additional gear such as armor for a halfling. When you're done shopping, you're ready to start adventuring. Before I start talking about how to create the dungeons, let's talk about combat, as it might help you determine what kind of equipment you want to bring with you into the darkness. And besides, you'll be getting into combat a lot, so it's best to be prepared. Here's the general way combat works. You, the party, will typically attack first. Depending on the order that you have the characters in, defined as the marching order, will determine who acts first. After each of the heroes has a turn, the enemy then has their counterattack. The turn then goes back to the heroes. This repeats until either side flees or is eradicated. Another thing to remember is during the rolls, you will be adjusting what is physically rolled due to the class and equipment wielded by that character. On attack rolls, a light one-handed weapon, like a dagger, applies -1 to the roll, and a two-handed weapon increases it by 1. Standard one-handed weapons don't adjust the roll. Same goes with defense. If you have a shield equipped, it's +1 to your defensive roll. Light armored characters also add +1, while heavy armor improves your roll by +2. There are some benefits to having that decrease, like during trap escape rolls, so don't fret so much about having a negative action in your rolls. So let's go through a battle or two to explain the mechanics a bit more in depth, shall we? Let's say our party consists of a level 1 rogue, level 1 elf, level 2 dwarf, and a level 2 warrior, in that order. And in the room we're in, we're fighting 7 level 3 goblins. Our party is up first. In order for attacks to hit, we need to roll the d6, and the number rolled must be equal to or higher than the level, in this case 3. Our first roll is a 2, which constitutes the rogue's attack. This is lower than 3 at the start, but there are a few modifications each character may have, depending on their class and skill. Remember, the rogue only adds his level to attack if the party outnumbers the enemy, which in this case, 4 is less than 7, so this doesn't apply. But the rogue can also only wield light hand weapons, which also give it a -1 to your attack rolls, so this 2 now becomes a 1. For the rogue's turn, he does no damage. Next up is the elf. He rolled a 6, which is almost always a beneficial thing in combat, for there's a rule called the exploding 6. Basically, 6s are critical hits, and allow you to continuously roll the die until something other than the 6 is rolled. So we roll again, and get a 1. This means that our total attack roll was a 7. Our elf is using a standard broadsword, so no bonus there. However, since it's a one-handed weapon, the elf adds their level to their attack. So now the 7 is an 8. 8 is greater than 3, so the goblins are going to lose some of their members. Even better, since 8 divided by 3 is 2 and change, 2 goblins are actually killed. Whenever your attack roll goes over an enemy's level, if you can stack that number, for example, in this case, rolls of 3, 6, 9, 12, and so on, you do stacking damage, killing multiple creatures. So in this case, that roll of 8 kills 2 goblins, and now there are 5 left. The dwarf is up next, and they roll another 6, followed by a second 6, and then a 1 for a total of 13. Our dwarf is using a 2-handed warhammer, so +1 is added to the roll. Add in their level to the attack, so another +2. Finally, dwarves had an added class benefit of adding +1 to attack rolls against goblins, so we have a final attack roll of 17. Since there are 5 goblins left, they are all eliminated, resulting in a successful combat encounter. Next up, you roll for any treasure left behind, and would continue on in your dungeon diving. Let's take that same party and pretend that we didn't roll all those 6s. Let's say there are 5 goblins remaining, and you weren't too successful on the offensive. It's now your turn to defend. Each enemy character is now going to attack. You get to choose who the enemies attack, provided that if possible, every character gets an equal opportunity to defend. So in this case, each of your adventurers will be attacked once, with one of them of your choice taking the 5th defensive action. Personally, I just go in marching order, right down the line. In order to successfully defend an attack, you must roll greater than the opponent's level, in this case a 3, so a 4 must be rolled. Our rogue rolls a 6, so he's obviously clear, even before his level gets added to the roll. If you'd really like to, you can roll again due to the exploding 6 rule, but in this case it's not necessary. The elf rolls a 1, so they're going to take 1 damage from that goblin. The dwarf also rolls a 1, so they will take 1 damage as well. The warrior rolls a 3, which normally would be equal to the goblin's level, and therefore hazardous to their health. However, due to him wearing light armor, you add +1 to that roll, making the new total 4, which means that the defensive move has been successful and he takes no damage, and we didn't even have to add in our shield this time. You can see why having good equipment can be beneficial to turn bad rolls into good situations. Finally, we have all 4 adventurers being attacked, but there's still that 5th goblin. In this case, you choose who that 5th goblin is going to attack. I'm going to choose my rogue. The rogue rolls a 2, and even with his level being added, he's still only at 3, which is equal to the level of the goblin. This means that the rogue takes a hit. By the way, if you roll a 1 in combat on either your attack or defensive roll, it's an immediate failure, no matter how much you can add to the number from other perks. This is excluded if it's rolled after an exploding 6, however. But how do spells work? Spellcasters utilize spells during their attack roll, well, except for the escape spell. Many of the spells act just like an attack roll, but have many additional benefits. For example, with the fireball spell, the wizard adds his level to the roll, functioning like a typical attack. However, against minions, it will kill an amount equal to the wizard's roll minus the level of the minions. So back to those goblins. We roll a 5. Subtract 3 from that for the goblin's level, and 2 goblins are killed. Very useful. On the other hand, you have Lightning Bolt, which only ever kills 1 minion no matter what the roll was. However, it will always do 2 points of damage against bosses. The other spells are Blessing, which removes many negative status ailments and is an all-around good spell to have at the ready. Sleep, which instantly defeats many creatures, including bosses. Protect, which gives it +1 to defensive rolls for the remainder of combat for a single character. And Escape, which is the only spell used during the defensive turn, and evacuates him to the first room of the dungeon. It's useful if the wizard is near death, but it does make your 4-member team now 3 members until they reunite. Speaking of bosses, they are fought similarly to other creatures. However, they have health points instead of multiple creatures in the group. Large hits just take off multiple health points. Now that we've finished combat, what do we do? Oftentimes, fallen enemies will have treasure on their corpses. Let's again take those pesky goblins for example. According to the table, you roll on the treasure table at -1, which basically means that you'll never find magical equipment on them. So we roll a 2. Subtract 1, which totals 1. When we look at the treasure table, we find that we get D6 gold pieces. When receiving gold, it's up to you whether you want to split it up right away or tally it and share it at the end of the adventure. Personally, I just do the latter to make things easier. Just keep in mind that if you have a dwarf, he must receive at least 1 gold if you split it up right away, so make sure to share it. In addition, depending on what you killed, you may earn experience. Enemies are grouped into 4 main categories: vermin, minions, weird monsters, and bosses. Vermin are just run-of-the-mill creatures that run around and typically won't have much treasure. However, defeated minions need to be tracked on the play sheet. For every 10 groups of minions killed, you earn what's called an XP roll, or experience roll. Similarly, anytime you kill any weird creature or boss character, you get an immediate XP roll. How do these work? Let's take our existing group of warriors. When they killed that group of 7 goblins, they add 1 mark to the minions killed tally. This means that they have 1 point out of 10 for an experience roll. Now let's say they killed enough minion groups to hit 10. You now have a choice to decide who rolls for a level up. In this case, we can only attempt to level up to 2 level 1 characters, or the rogue and the elf. Per the rulebook, you cannot level up characters twice to overpower them, as in, our level 2 characters cannot be brought to level 3 until the level 1 characters are level 2. In later books, there's something called a highest class level, or HCL, which would doom your underleveled characters if you did allow serious gaps in levels, but we won't worry about that here. Anyway, let's choose the level 1 rogue. We roll the die and attempt to get a result higher than their current level. In this case, I rolled a 5. This means that the rogue levels up to 2. He gains an extra hit point immediately, since maximum life is always a certain amount plus their level. In addition, future combat rolls will now allow him to add +2 to his defense and +2 to attack whenever outnumbering enemies. You can see how leveling up can really improve your characters in a big way. Let's say that we kill a boss and gain another XP point. Now it's the elf's turn. However, we rolled a 1. This means that the elf failed the level up chance and remains at level 1. Although normally it's against the rules to level up the same character twice in a row, in this case, the elf is exempt from that since he's the only remaining level 1 character in the party. With all of the combat mechanics out of the way, it's finally time to talk about dungeon creation. For this, having 2 dice makes things a bit easier, but you can get away with just using 1. First off, the entrance is created from one of 6 different rooms. Simply roll the die and look up the value on the table in the book. Once you have the room, you recreate it on the bottom of your sheet of paper. There you go, room number 1. This is the one room you won't roll for content since it's the entrance of the dungeon, and therefore, arguably the safest room here. Once you have this drawn out, it's time to start rolling extra rooms. Now on, you figure out what exit you want to take. Roll 2 standard d6 dice, or 1d6 twice, to denote a 2-digit number from 11 to 66. Now, look that value up to determine which room gets placed next. Feel free to rotate rooms as necessary to make them fit within the existing walls. Also, if you start running out of space and cannot finish a room, just stop drawing the room or hallway in that area. 4AD is very forgiving on how you draw these rooms out. I should also mention that there are 2 different types of dungeon spaces, rooms and corridors. Rooms are standard open areas consisting of tiles that are more than 1 space wide. Corridors are narrow areas in which only 2 of your party members can traverse at a time, shoulder to shoulder. This will often dictate whether you run into something or not. Once you draw the room, or corridor for that matter, your adventurers are occupying it, and now it's time to roll for content. For this, once again roll 2 dice together, or 1 die twice, and add the results, for a number of 2 to 12. Now, consult the room contents table to determine what is in this room. After rolling for content, you'll probably again need to roll on an appropriate table to determine the exact nature of what was found. Also, if a room was empty, you have a chance to explore it a bit more in depth, but I'll explain searching in a future video. Once a room is cleared, you just repeat the steps. Basically, you roll to determine the room layout, then roll for room content, and perform the necessary actions. Rinse and repeat. Simple, right? But what happens when you start running out of space on the paper? Well, once you draw the final room that you can possibly draw, if you haven't run into a final boss yet, now's the time to encounter it. Let's talk about how to complete the dungeon dive. There are a few ways that you can encounter a final boss. The aforementioned last room of the dungeon is one. Secondly, you can roll 11 or 12 for room content. These bosses aren't necessarily the final one though. Basically, when you encounter a boss, roll the d6, either before or after you determine what the monster is, your choice. If you roll a 6, surprise, final boss time. Anything else, it's just the standard boss creature. Now, if you've already defeated prior bosses or weird creatures, you add 1 per boss or weird creature killed to that roll. So if you've fought and killed 2 bosses and 1 weird monster, and roll a 3, 3 plus 2 plus 1 equals 6. So this creature will now be the final boss. The final boss will have an extra health point and 1 extra attack per turn, making it a bit more powerful than the garden variety enemies that you've encountered so far. However, defeating it grants triple the amount of gold or double the magic items, depending on what you found behind. Regardless on whether you kill the final boss or just need to retreat due to less than ideal circumstances, like critically low health, you'll still need to backtrack to the entrance of the dungeon. This isn't without its threats. Every room you trace back through requires you to roll a d6, and if a 1 is rolled, you are ambushed by what are called wandering monsters. In these, enemies attack first due to the element of surprise, and any defensive bonuses to your rolls that you normally get from shields are negated for this first turn. You complete this combat encounter and just move on. One last thing to touch on: saves. There will be times where you'll be instructed to make a save against something, whether it be poison, a falling boulder trap, and so on. In order to perform this save, the character making the save simply needs to roll the d6 and have the result equal to or greater than the level of the save, much like an attack roll. For example, if our rogue is making a save against a level 3 poison trap, we need to roll a 3 or higher to successfully evade it. Don't forget about any additional modifications to the rolls, such as the rogue adding their level to any trap saves. Once you reach the starting room, you've cleared the dungeon. Congratulations! Providing your party is still alive, their health is replenished back to maximum levels, remembering to take into account any bonuses from level ups. Gold and spoils may need to be spread around if you are just killing it on the dungeon sheet like I do. Feel free to do some shopping for additional gear or the almighty healing potions. Also, maybe you'd like to let those adventurers rest and create a new party of level 1 classes you haven't tried yet, or mix and match. Just remember, if you have an experienced group of say 2 level 5 journeymen and bring 2 young blood level 1s, that they need to be leveled up first. And that is a general intro to 4 Against Darkness, but there's still quite a bit of stuff to go over, with advanced rules that you may or may not want to use. Keep a lookout for my next video where I go over the rest of the advanced stuff. Thanks for watching. Happy fragging.